The Los Angeles Dodgers re-invite a despicable anti-Catholic drag queen group after previously disinviting them. Clearly, they have succumbed to some pressure by wokesters. The president of China launches a Mao-like re-education program to unify the country amid some economic and cultural challenges. And 25% of Canadians say that they would support medically assisted suicide for the homeless. We're going to get into some of Canada's crazy medically assisted suicide laws that already exist, and some may be coming sooner than we think. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know for today, Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. First, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below so that you can be notified every time I post a new news or timeless video. And also be sure to follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. The transgender saga continues with regard to LA Dodgers inviting this terrible drag queen group to an LA Pride night. So I previously reported on this story on Julie Noted to tell you that the Dodgers had invited them. Then I reported on it to tell you that they had disinvited them. And now, third time around, the Dodgers have re-invited the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence to their Pride night. You never know, maybe in a few days I'll tell you that they disinvited them another time. Though honestly, I think this is it. I'm going to get into why in just a few moments. Sean said, I thought it was 3 strikes and you're out. Yeah, seems to make sense. I'm going to smile and nod like I understand that baseball reference. I don't watch baseball. No, I do know that. I'm not totally stupid with regard to sports. Okay, so for those of you who have been asleep and not watching Julie Noted, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence are this drag queen group that is vociferously anti-Catholic. Indeed, you can tell by the very name that their entire ethos is to essentially mock Catholics and Catholicism, excuse me, my gosh. During the team's Pride Night celebration on June 16th, so just about a month away, they agreed to invite this drag queen group to receive a Community Hero Award for all of the good that they do in the greater Los Angeles community. Let's look a bit at what this drag queen group actually does. They really just promote anti-Catholic hatred. They have a ministry. They also induct certain sisters as quote-unquote nuns. Ready for the names that they call their sisters? One is called Sister Taint a Virgin. The other is called Sister Risque of the Sistine Chapel. And another one is called Sister Eateth My Flesh. They have nun induction ceremonies, and their official slogan is Go Forth and Sin Some More. On Easter this past year, they hosted a Mary and Jesus-themed striptease, which involved one of the sisters stripping upside down on a wooden cross. This was first reported by the San Francisco Chronicle. Also, they had a shirtless competition for who could be the hunkiest Jesus. And back in 2007, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence tricked the Archbishop of San Francisco into giving them a Eucharist so that they could publicly defile it. So the Dodgers invited them because the Dodgers want to be woke and they're partnering with LA Pride. And then there was a major upheaval from Catholic individuals as well as Catholic groups. One of those groups was the Catholic League. Their president, Bill Donahue, wrote a letter to Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred calling the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence an obscene anti-Catholic group. His letter was really powerful, and at least in the short term, it did seem to enact some change. Allow me to read a paragraph. He said, in 1947, the Brooklyn Dodgers made history by naming Jackie Robinson to its roster. He was the first black man to play in Major League Baseball. Now, the Dodgers are in the business of promoting bigotry, not fighting it. By rewarding anti-Catholicism, the Dodgers have broken bread with the most despicable elements in American society today. How interesting it is that so many of these groups that were once titans, progenitors, leaders of these good movements have so turned on their head. I reported yesterday on Julie Noted that the NAACP has come out and issued a travel advisory warning to African Americans, saying that it may not be safe for them to travel to the state of Florida because Governor Ron DeSantis has initiated some, quote, aggressive policies towards African Americans. As proof of these supposed aggressive policies, they cite the fact that Governor DeSantis opposed an AP African American history course from being taught. Though he didn't oppose the course in its entirety, he opposed the politicized elements that were sneaking into the course and actually taking away from the legitimate teaching of African American history. He just wanted to get rid of critical race theory, black queer theory, intersectionality, all of those things that would have diluted the program and taken it away from focusing on the contributions of African Americans, whether they be W.E.B. Du Bois or Martin Luther King Jr. The point is, though, that the NAACP 60 years ago was on the vanguard of the civil rights movement. They were the ones that changed our country for the better by uprooting the evil that was Jim Crow, okay? Many years ago, as very eloquently argued by Bill Donahue, the Brooklyn Dodgers made history by making Jackie Robinson the first black player in Major League Baseball. We talk all about legacies. Do you really think the NAACP and Major League Baseball have been preserving that legacy? What they are doing now is so evil and so unraveling the great progress that we have made. They have turned into politicized organizations that are seeking to curry favor for their personal and professional advantage. A lot of these Dodgers owners of the team and players probably think this is ridiculous, but they are so cowardly that they wouldn't dare to oppose it. And they are being cowards by letting this group back in. Members of the NAACP know that Florida isn't an unsafe place for African Americans. That is such an affront to the history of our country when actually many parts of the country were unsafe for African Americans. It's really sick the way that they are calling what is that children's book? A wolf? Boy Who Cried Wolf? That's what they're doing. They are crying wolf. See, I don't really know that much about, clearly about children's books and about baseball and other sports too. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Thank you. My gosh. Hey, I could probably tell you more about the differences between Sunni and Shia Islam than I could quote basic American children's books. But you understand my point, that this is a horrible distortion of the legacies of these groups. By the way, just a fact for you, the head of the board of directors of the NAACP lives, guess where? I think he lives in California. You think he lives in New York? Nope. He lives in Tampa, Florida, okay? These groups are frauds. Whatever they are talking about right now, they are fraudulent. Let's go back to the Dodgers. So the Dodgers revoked the invitations to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They came out with a statement saying, given the strong feelings of those who've been offended by the Sisters' inclusion in our evening, and in an effort to not distract from the great benefits that we've seen over the years on Pride Night, we are deciding to remove them from this year's group of honorees. I remember reading this statement on air when I was reporting on the fact that the Dodgers disinvited, and I said this was a mealy-mouthed response. What the Dodgers should have said, instead of saying that some people have, quote, strong feelings and they don't want to offend them and they don't want to detract from other elements of the night, they should have just admitted that they made a terrible mistake and that this group is very egregiously and offensively anti-Catholic. But no, they were hiding behind this mealy-mouthed statement, and this should have been the clue. This should have been the clue that they were going to be exploited and they were going to be taken advantage of, and they would capitulate to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and reinvite them. You can tell from the statement here that they are just so cowering to whatever mob is coming at them, whether it be a Catholic mob or whether it be a woke mob. They're just cowering in the moment to whoever they want to curry favor with. So it's no shock that they reinvited these sisters. Listen to the statement that the Dodgers came out with. After much thoughtful feedback from our diverse communities, you know what that means, honest conversations within the Los Angeles Dodgers organization, and generous discussions with the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the Dodgers would like to offer our sincerest apologies for disinviting this group. Give me a break. Okay, the sisters, want to know what Sister Sissy Teen Chapel or Sister Edith My Flesh said? They go, a full apology and explanation was given to us by the Dodgers staff, which we accept. We believe the apology is sincere because the Dodgers have worked with us for 10 years to strengthen our community, and they have asked us to continue an ongoing relationship with them. I have a few thoughts for you besides the ones that I have already said, namely that the legacies of these once great organizations have been so terribly distorted. First, is there any arena in life that is left untouched by wokery? No, it's difficult to think of one, isn't it? You go on the airplane. I was flying on Delta recently, and they have all of these queer-looking individuals in the flight safety video. Okay, maybe there's nothing technically wrong with that. I'm not on principle against that. But you know they're trying to feed you a political agenda. And it just seems that everywhere you turn, there is this effort of companies to show that they are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I'll provide another example. I was at the Guggenheim Museum in New York about a month and a half ago, and I bought a ticket thinking that they would have their usual masterpieces there of classical historic art. No, they had a critical race theory exhibit that I stupidly spent $16 on to go see. Museums are now being infiltrated by this woke thing, by this woke nonsense, where these great exhibits are actually being retired in order for new ones. Look at TV shows. You turn on the TV now and a new season of your favorite show comes out and there are all these woke storylines. Obviously, you open the newspaper and all of the stories are very politicized. So many of our leaders always talk about politics. President Biden gave the commencement address at Howard University a few weeks ago. You know, when you're sitting there graduating from college, I know because I did this just about a year ago, you don't want to hear about climate change. You don't want to hear about economic downturn. You don't want to hear about white supremacy, as President Biden talked about in his Howard University address. You want to hear about life. You want wisdom. You want, for lack of better terms, timeless, eternal values being spoken to you, because you're sitting there and you're scared. Frankly, you don't care about climate change in that moment, but it shows you how much this has taken over our society. And now you can't even go to a Dodgers game without Sister of the Sistine Chapel potentially stripping on a wooden cross in front of you. It's so abrasive and not to mention offensive, which brings me to my second point. Can you imagine this ever happening with a Muslim drag queen group, or better said, an anti-Muslim drag queen group that came up with names that were seeking to make fun of Islam, that had, instead of a ministry, a conglomeration of supposed imams? I mean, can you imagine this? People would be up in arms. Why is it that we live in a society now where white, conservative, overwhelmingly Christians can be publicly mocked, humiliated, criticized, and indeed discriminated against, and we're totally fine with it? It shows you that the people who talk about moving towards an equitable society where everyone's equal, they don't actually really believe in that, many of them. Because if they did believe in that, they would protect all individuals of society equally. You know, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, they put out a statement when they were disinvited. They said, "We were looking forward to having a moment to say our message, which is there is room in the world for everyone to be who they are, free from guilt and shame." This is what this drag queen group said. They want everyone to be who they are, free from guilt and shame, but the whole emphasis, the whole ethos of their group is to mock and disparage Catholics. Is that not trying to inculcate guilt and shame into those who are members of that religion? We see that the FBI had this internal memo that was bravely released by the whistleblower who I had the honor of interviewing on this show, Kyle Seraphin. There was an internal memo in the FBI saying that Catholics are violent extremists. There was an incident in Dedham, Massachusetts, where a library wanted to put up Christmas decorations, and people actually successfully campaigned to remove those decorations because Christianity is supposedly a white nationalist religion. We are seeing the overt discrimination of some members of our society because they are not part of a protected class. But any discrimination affects all of us. And third, I would like to say that with regard to this transgender issue, you know, people who oppose my opposition to having this group come to the Dodgers game will say, well, what does it matter? Isn't it a good thing that we live in a society now where transgender individuals can come to a game? It's affording tolerance, but it's actually not. There's a difference between tolerance and outright endorsement and proselytization, if you will. What we see now in schools with this transgender woke stuff coming into the classroom, that is not an effort to make people tolerant of different lifestyle choices. That is an effort to get into the minds of children and create converts. Why else would you be having a drag queen tell stories to your 4-year-old child in school? By the way, this is happening. People say it's not happening. It is. It's happening in Arizona. Read their Department of Education codes. Read the New Jersey Department of Education codes. It's happening right here in Los Angeles with the LAUSD, which has 450 schools under its jurisdiction, and they have Rainbow Club meetings once a month, which include drag queen story hours. But the point is, I want you to see this. Whether it's in schools, whether it's the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence being invited to the Dodger game, whether it's on your screen when you're flying and you're seeing transgender flight attendants in the safety video. This has gone beyond tolerance. This has gone into, I want to get into your face, I want to proselytize, I want to make converts, and I want you to actively endorse this. And if you don't actively endorse this, then you're a bigot. Everyone deserves tolerance. It's part of the deal of living in a pluralistic society, but not everyone deserves endorsement. And by shoving all of this down our throats, they are making us have to endorse some of these lifestyles, some of these positions, and that is just antithetical to the values that used to prevail in this country. Now, moving on to terrible values that are prevailing in another country, the president of China, Xi Jinping, is launching a re-education program in an effort to reunify China after it has encountered some difficulties. You duly noted listeners know that I talk a lot about China on this show. I often remark about what a great threat China is to the United States. To provide some examples, the Pentagon recently announced that China has surpassed us in their number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. China is gearing up and aligning with Russia in order to create a permanently manned moon base on the moon by 2035. China produces the fentanyl and sends it to the Mexican drug cartels, which funnel it across our border. That has resulted in over 100,000 deaths per year. Fentanyl is the #1 cause of overdose for Americans, or for death actually, not just overdose, #1 cause of death in Americans aged 18 to 45. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party spies on us every day, all day, through apps like TikTok, which has 120 million users in the United States. So given that I tell you so much about what a threat China is, you're probably going, what? They have some challenges? Actually, yes, they do. They had zero COVID lockdown policies that were so draconian. Xi Jinping's regime made people stay inside their apartments. They actually welded apartment doors shut. There was a terrible fire that happened at the end of 2022 that burned down an apartment building, killing over 60 Chinese citizens because the roads were blocked off and the firefighters couldn't get there in time because of this zero COVID policy. They literally blockaded streets in order to prevent people from seeing one another and spreading COVID. In the aftermath of those zero COVID lockdowns, which were repealed early in 2023, there were actually protests, which are a rarity in China because they are often so terribly suppressed. But Chinese citizens actually gathered and were distributing leaflets online opposing Xi Jinping's regime. That has been one of the challenges to the regime. Another challenge has also been economically. Though China is the second largest economy in the world and it is certainly growing, China saw in the early weeks of this year big companies such as Apple pull some of their factories out of China. Apple is now moving many of their factories into India because they think that Xi Jinping is ruling over China with too strong of a hand, and Apple doesn't want to be in a country where the leader has become too authoritarian and dictatorial so as to interfere with their business practices. That was a big deal for China to lose Apple. There was one factory in a province in China which produced 85% of all of the world's iPhones. So that now that Apple has moved to India, China is viewing that as a loss. And then the final example I'll give is that China for decades has boasted having the largest population in the world with 1.4 billion people. Just about 2 weeks ago, India surpassed China as the most populous country in the world by maybe about 1 million people, but nevertheless, it is ticked up above China. China also, as many of you know from listening to my show with Ken Gronbach, who is a demographer, China is also going to encounter a grave demographic issue in the next 20 years as a result of their one-child policy. Though the one-child policy was repealed in 2015, there are many members of older generations which did not have many children, and so older people are going to die out. There won't be many young people to supplement that loss, and so China's population may be cut in half over the next 2 decades. Now, the reason why I say China is a grave threat is because they can do a lot of damage in the meantime, but what we're seeing here with this re-education program launched by Xi Jinping is that clearly he and other members of the Chinese Communist Party are starting to view these challenges as difficult, and they want to regain some of the power that they once had, hence why they are embarking on these programs. So Xi is launching what is called, or what he calls, a quote, spiritual baptism. He seeks to reunify members of the Chinese Communist Party by saying, quote, the entire party must unify its thinking, its will, and unify its actions. So he has launched themed education programs with Xi Jinping Thought. That is the official title of the Thought program. And this is not just with regard to Chinese Communist Party members, but with regard to everyday citizen. These re-education programs are occurring in schools, in banks, in courts, in gas stations, just about anywhere in the country. When Xi Jinping talks about reunifying the party, he doesn't just mean members of the Central Committee. He means everyday citizens, because there's only one party in China, the Chinese Communist Party. So by extension, everyone is a member of the party. He says that he would like to encourage party members, i.e. Chinese citizens, to, quote, seek truth from facts, which is essentially going to be anti-Western, pro-China, pro-authoritarian, pro-socialist, but really capitalist propaganda that seeks to solidify Xi Jinping's power. This is not dissimilar to what Chairman Mao did back in 1961. Those of you may know this from watching see how I just slide in on my episodes, my history episode on China that I released recently. There was a disastrous Great Leap Forward plan, an economic plan that backfired hugely, resulted in a catastrophic famine which killed 45 million Chinese citizens. In the aftermath of that, in 1961, Chairman Mao initiated a re-education program trying to tighten his grip and reunify members of the party who may be in opposition to him. It's not a totally apt analogy to compare Xi Jinping's thought program to Chairman Mao's, but what it shows is that there is a pattern among Chinese leaders. When they think that their power is dwindling, or when they think that there may be a challenge to that power, they are immediately going to embark on a re-education program quest to regain it. Moving on to the final news story of the day, there has been a research poll that has been released that shows that Canadian citizens are shifting rapidly with regard to their views on medically assisted suicide, becoming much more encouraging of such procedures. And this is coming alongside actual laws that have been passed to extend this right to many individuals. Allow me to explain. According to Research Corporation, more than 25% of Canadians support allowing medically assisted suicide for the homeless. 11% of those respondents said that they strongly agree that the homeless should be able to obtain these medically assisted suicides, and 17% said that they moderately agree. There is a similar trend with regard to Canadians' views on those who are poor being able to obtain medically assisted suicide. 11% said they strongly agree that the poor should be able to obtain this, whereas 16% said that they moderately agree. Previously, Canada had laws, some of the most liberal medically assisted suicide laws in the world, saying that those with terminal illnesses, specifically those with terminal cancer, at the direction and approval of a doctor, would be allowed to have euthanasia or other medically assisted suicide. In 2021, they changed that law to say now it's not just going to be extended to patients with fatal diseases, but now it's going to be extended to a whole host of other ailments. One of them included chronic pain. So we see that the criteria for this has just gotten far less stringent. And now Canada has amended their criminal code so that a citizen with a mental illness, they didn't specify the most severe mental illnesses, they just said any kind of mental illness can request euthanasia as long as they can show that this mental illness cannot be remediated, and as long as 2 doctors sign off to say that the person is competent to make that decision. It's not even that the doctors have to sign off and that's saying that they agree with it. The doctors can disagree with it, but the doctors have to say that the patient is competent to make that decision. So basically, anyone can get a medically assisted suicide right in Canada now. They just claim that they have a mental illness that cannot be remediated, and they have it. What an awful, disastrous thing. This isn't even a left versus right, Democrat versus Republican issue. This is just a human decency, civilizational issue. We are really living in a civilization now where you can just get help from the government to die, and the government is endorsing this. Of course, we have suicides every day, and it's an awful tragedy, but we are really moving into terrible territory when the government is endorsing this, and actually not just endorsing, but wanting to provide help for people who are doing that. Another poll taken by this Research Co. With regard to Canadians' views on the matter asked whether they believe that parents should receive criminal penalties for helping a child obtain a medically assisted suicide. 51% of Canadians said that some sanctions should be levied onto parents who do such a thing. Now, this ran the gamut. Some of the people who answered that there should be sanctions said that there should be some jail time. Others said that there should be the death penalty, so they ran the gamut. But what's important here is that 24% of respondents said that they should receive no penalty at all, and 24% also said that they were not sure. Many have argued that what Canada proves is the slippery slope argument on full display. Many people who are quite conservative, not even just politically, but with regard to their lifestyles, use the slippery slope argument. You know, if you give your kid half a cookie after bedtime, they're going to get used to it, and then they're going to ask for a full cookie, and then you're going to end up giving them 2 cookies, and then they're going to end up having the whole jar. That's the slippery slope argument. Many people are saying that this is on full display. Canada allowed some medically assisted suicides if you had a fatal illness. Then they allowed it with chronic pain, and now they're basically allowing it for everyone. I think the more apt characterization of this, certainly, yes, it is a slippery slope argument, but it really demonstrates what happens to a society that becomes severed from a Judeo-Christian worldview. My dear friend and co-host Dennis Prager, one of the most controversial statements he ever made publicly was that he said in a PragerU video, quote, "Without God, murder isn't wrong." People went up in arms about this. They said, oh my gosh, how could you even say such a thing? But the point that Dennis was trying to show here, and this is what opponents of religion don't understand, is that by tying our governmental values to God, to the Judeo-Christian worldview, to the Bible, it makes certain things unchanging and eternal. The reason why the Constitution says that we are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights, that is not a coincidence. That's actually not even trying to slide religion into the Constitution. That is trying to say that there are certain rights that we can never, ever contest. That people are inherently equal, that there is an inherent dignity to the human being, that we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we are endowed by man with these certain rights, then man can take them away. But if we're endowed by God, God can't take them away. They are always, always in place. And so when Dennis was saying, without God, murder isn't wrong, what he was pointing to is if we tie our values to these eternal principles, you can never make an argument that murder is right. Because always, in every universe, at all times, murder is wrong if we are subscribing to these eternal principles. We see now what happens when we cut ourselves off from those eternal principles. Man is now saying, well, maybe murder isn't wrong. Maybe murder isn't wrong if you're the one that's making the decision to murder yourself. Or murder isn't wrong if you're one of the doctors who's allowing someone the right to make a decision to murder themselves. What does it say about how we value a human being if we think that their life can and should be so easily thrown away? Isn't the solution to mental illness to try to help people, to try to get them out of that rut, that hole, so that they can have a better life? What Canada is essentially doing now is bowing down to mental illness, saying, well, it's going to happen, so nothing we can do about it. You might as well just check out of life. It it indicates a cheapening of the worth of the human being. And once we are getting into this territory of saying that a human life, if a person doesn't think their life isn't worth living, then it isn't worth living, what's coming next? I shudder to think about it. Thank you all very much for joining me today. Again, reminder to subscribe to this channel. Also be sure to follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter, and I will see you all soon. Thank you.